But nonetheless, I think maybe casting, as was expected of me, at least the phone conversation that I had with Sujit, was an outsider's perspective, if you will, is what is expected. And I'm hoping to do that. I like the book, I'll be honest with you. I really like the book because it's scholarly work. I thought it advances our knowledge. I also thought the evidence and the arguments are pretty tightly woven. It did a pretty good job of all of those kinds of things. It's well written and accessible. Claims it to be accessible to lay readers. I would qualify that with informed lay readers. That's what I might want to add to that, not just any lay reader. At the end of the day, a spotlight is cast on, to my mind, on cinema, which is at the heart of it, the entire book-length work that it is all about. In particular, cinema and politics, that nexus is interrogated in depth, and it concludes that the terms have to be, this has gone, the cover page that's going, he concludes that the terms have to be hyphenated. Cine-Politics, that's how he titles the entire thing. As a book-length argument and justification of this hyphenation of the two terms, that's what I meant by a significant addition to our knowledge, and that's what you would get it as these things. For a minute, let me say the hyphenation as what I got out of it as a word in the title. I first came across world system, hyphenated those two terms, and it's an interdependent system of, this was when it was said, it was to say that there's an interdependent system of countries linked by political and economic competition. The term was coined by a historian, Emanuel Wallerstein, and is hyphenated, those world and system was hyphenated to emphasize the interdependence of places and regions around the world. That's how this world system was done as part of it. The Cine-Politics, that hyphenation, Madhava Prasad himself will say, and I quote, argument has been put forth that strictly cine-political phenomena may be observed as taking shape in their film careers before they launch their parties. The term cine-politics is used to refer to the totality of the phenomena. Now, to do this task, he approaches it from an interdisciplinary, or maybe I think the right word would be transdisciplinary analysis is undertaken. In fact, critiques the several disciplinary approaches, views it as operating out of silos, or can be leading to a sort of a myopic or view on the subject matter. So, while the terms cinema, politics, star values, star power, theater, and many such are common to the earlier analysis, but caution is advised that they are universal appraisal. That's where this comes out in the work. So the first cut is all talking about the southern India. The second cut is they're saying that in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka, these terms come together in a particular fashion. And I wanted to add here, I prefer it, and Satish for having introduced me as a geographer, and this is the third cut. I would have said geography, I would say in particular advisedly. A word on that geography. Geography, as people understand, is the rivers, the mountains, to whatnot, at times to the flat. By and large, geography is associated usually with the physical features. The people are all taken out of the equation, if you will. And that's how the geography was thought of. I, on the other hand, and many would think of geography slightly with the people. In other words, both Bombay and Calcutta, to my mind, are coastal places, large cities with so many population, everything is common. And yet, what will distinguish them will be there are languages that are different, the tastes are different, the food is different, some other things, all these elements. So the geography of a place, that would mean the physical features that are shaped by the societies and those physical features at times shape the society. Both are happening, and I would want to consider them together, and that would be the geography that I would want to take into account. I think less is said about, to my mind, audience, voter, public, and their distinctions in this particular book. To me, I would want it a subject index as well, not only just the author and the cinema index that you already have provided for. I also thought a film theater, if you will, also is a space for critical reflection, and I wasn't sure that point comes through as part when I was reading it for me. Having said what is the geography and how I am characterizing it, I also think there is a uniqueness to Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. What is that uniqueness that is playing a role in this particular? So, for instance, you talk about linguistic reorganization and other things, but can we go beyond that? There are comparative elements, these are common elements, if you will, in all of those places. What you are essentially, I thought you were arguing, is they come together in a unique fashion. All these elements that are there, but that may be different in Tamil Nadu from Andhra Pradesh to Karnataka. But, and you kind of talk about the historical, socio-political event. These are your terms, I think. But you don't give a unique label, though, for either, all of those things. The label is all assigned to them is not unique. Though you think they are all coming out in a unique fashion, that doesn't happen in those fashion. Let me flag a few things that came to my mind as questions. At times I was myself curious to, and I don't have an answer, and I'm not expecting an answer in your response as well as later. The first one was regional identities and political aspirations, if you will. As I understand, regions and their grievances, and the grievances that many regional populations feel when they are part of a political unit with which they feel they're unable to identify. When they're unable to identify, then you begin to see some kind of a grievance coming up. There is a desire to be an independent political unit, and that is at the head of the agenda for many groups. Now, is the existence of local and regional nationalisms a good thing or a bad thing? It's a question that had to come up for me, not that you were wanting to address it or other things, but reading that, I don't think there is a correct answer perhaps, but it is perhaps a question that is worth thinking about. Political map is not sacrosanct. Changes occur, and often for a very good reason. Regionalism, I think you, in the earlier introductory remarks, you said about, it's in fashion today. You didn't say fashion today, but I'm just saying this thing. But in the trend towards creating of new states, reflecting ever more localized identities, should that be encouraged? That's the question. On one hand, you are finding, because of, some would argue, globalization and movement towards integration, some states, and I don't know if EU will qualify under that, or trying to come together, or the recent Crimea incidents that we are reading nowadays in the newspaper and wanting to be part of the Russia, would this be some kind of integration? On the other hand, there are numerous groups arguing that they are different from others, therefore should be separate from them. Most states in which certain groups are seeking some degree of independence react negatively to the possible loss of territory, population, and prestige. So is it better for a group to look outward and encourage cosmopolitanism, or to look inward and encourage ethnicity? Or is it possible to accomplish both these goals? The support for the sub-state level of nationalism result in an ethnocentric worldview and encourage lack of respect for others, or does it allow for increased self-respect and better understanding of others? Now, although there may not be an agreed upon answers to some of the difficult questions, One literature that I wanted to draw attention was literature from the social psychology, which suggesting that, and really I would say strongly suggesting that, simply classifying people into groups prompts a bias in favor of one's own group. Just to classify them itself will lead to somebody to begin to identify with one's own group. And such biases may arise even between groups that are interdependent and cooperative. So, not too long ago, and this used to be that I was at that point in time in the United States, in Canada, the English-speaking and the French-speaking were very close to coming to a point where there was this interdependency that was already known, there was this cooperative arrangement that was already known, and yet French Quebec was almost ready to become a separate state. Just a very whisker is what that did happen at that point of time. So, in a way, your argument about nationalism was reinforced with the creation of linguistic state creations that has happened, and that's the story that you are trying to talk about it. It's in light of that I had to come up and know and to raise these points. But I was also curious whether, and also because I know separately that you were away in these East Asian countries, or let me say Southeast Asian country not too long ago. So was there a pan-regionalism, if you will, with the, for example, Tamils elsewhere that was beginning to occur as a result of what you were observing, and how that is all coming and shaping as part of it? That's the first, if you will, that I wanted to flag it. The second point that I wanted to flag it for today is, will you just mark me for the time? Just attend. I'm a filler and use in media language, so I tend to talk a lot. Nowadays, geographers tend to look for representations that can take more of the world in. That's one idea, which is also an idea that you are also trying to base it on. And one of the strategies has been to disaggregate bounded spaces and into a smaller states or smaller units, and some of the same qualities, but also with some other qualities that operate what is known as at that scale. That is what is taken into account. So at national level, a few factors are operating, but you break it down to state, you break it down to something, a district, you break it down further to mandal level or otherwise, and then you will find some of those plus something that is very unique to that mandal or to that district. All of those are possibilities of creating some kind of, at that scale, you will begin to look at. So this mode of proceeding is continuing the same method of drawing the boundaries. What you did at national, you do the same thing at a mandal level or a district level or a state level and other things. In a slightly different form, while allowing the possibility of creating new blocks or migration of power from one block to another. I like your idea of how you put this representation takes the form of substitution. I really like that, how you put it. There are two orders of representation, that is representation as speaking for, that is what happens in the political arena, and representation as happens in the art and philosophy. They both come together as they collapse into one, as you put it there. And that idea of substitution, I think, I enjoyed that. I may have to use that and reflect on it at some point of time. But what if we regarded the world as made up of flows and trying to change our style of thought to accommodate that depiction? It's for about more than slightly over a decade and a half, this question has been raised. I don't think the task is easy, but can we now see a whole series of approaches that are trying to start with movement as an origin rather than as an end point? And the reason why I bring this up is that you begin to stress traveling identities and over fixed notions of belonging. That's what you have been, to my mind, doing it in terms of the fixed notions of identities, but you can shift to traveling notions of identity when you start to begin to see this worldview as one of the flows, and that may happen. There are examples elsewhere that but what will then happen is there is a more expansive vocabulary that is coming to being that can match these kinds of ambitions. And I'm not at any point of time suggesting this is any easy task, but events as well as structures, both will come into play. Transformation and becoming, as well as system and being, both of them will now become important, and those are the kinds of vocabulary that we are now beginning to look at it. One another point. One kind of space consists of what we might call images. Now, it is certain that images are a key element of space because it is so often through them that we register the spaces around us, imagine how they might turn in the future. Everywhere I see a screen, at every point of time, even in the lobbies and the corridors, we now have screens for whatnot. The pervasiveness of images, the world is populated by all kinds of screens which produce feed of images. So a proliferation of images has made it increasingly difficult to read of images. I think, Madhava Prasad, you also pointed that out, that the aspect of images, that there is a result, as a result of all this proliferation of images, there is a complex process of mediation which themselves bear meaning. And I would have wanted in this book more of that aspect to be talked about it. There is the way I'm pointing out is there is a swirling of images all around us, if you will. There are so many images are there in so many different ways. Then they will all be competing for our attention, if you will. Now, this will produce some kind of a, I'm just so tired that I won't do anything with my mental space, is one argument. George Simmel or Waterman, Benjamin and others, they would have all, and want to shift from that and say that the growth of cinema has probably provided an opportunity for a new kind of moving images to come into existence, which to some extent are undercutting the social styles and produce new apprehensions of space. I was actually stunned by the statistics on NTR as to how many movies, and you had these numbers for which were in different genres that he has been part of it, and then this is just NTR, plus all other movies that are coming in Telugu language, plus other things. There is a huge numbers that are out there. So, as David Harvey would put it, we can wrap all these new image forms up in one big package called postmodernism, making all the images add up to one vast capitalist spectacle, but better. I think what we are now doing as geographers may be better, and that is you look at the cooking of different steps along the way of these images and their geographies, testing at each step for its various potentials to tell us something new about how we see the world. I don't think anybody and everybody can do that task, but somebody like you, Sat, who has been with the field, have an expertise and insight of the entire field from end to end, you will be in a position to tell us about some of these potentials of the spaces at every step of the way. For example, Bruno Latour, who was talking in terms of, an example is a parallel in terms of talking about a painting, piece of religious painting finished. And he talks of all kinds of intermediaries that are there, each of which is a bearer of a spatial meaning. For example, the varnishes, the dealers, the patrons, the assistants, the maps, the measuring devices, the graphs, the charts, the angels, the saints, the monks, the worshipper, and each one of which it has complicated the intervening geographies, and what you see ultimately is one. And I think there is a possibility for the cinema, for that what you are seeing, as there are a whole host of things. You allude to some of those as part of it, but really it could go, it's a harder slog, requires a methodological expertise perhaps that you could bring to bear and these things. It was about maps, it was about reorganization. That's how I saw it in the beginning when I started off this book. And the third term that I want to introduce, I've already done for space. The third term is one of landscape. The landscape is also becoming an organizing concept, especially in the cultural geography. I might qualify it, in the Anglophone cultural geography, not everywhere. Now, landscape always carries with it a set of representational practices. So you have a map that shows presidencies, that shows some states, and now it shows close to 30 states. So all of this is a representational practices. They refer to how people see, interpret, and represent the world around them as a landscape, and how a represented landscape reflects and actually helps produce a set of lived relationships taking place on the ground. Now, the reason I bring this up is that it seems productive to focus on the necessarily the discursive constitution of the material world. Representations themselves materially constitute reality. And I'm not wanting to go into this dualisms of reality and representation, the difference and how close they are to the reality and all of those things. So thus, reality is indistinguishable from the representation. And in this sense, the much more important question is how representations are produced and contested. I'm actually wanting a little more in this book on the material aspect, if you will, of this representation. Material aspect and ideological aspect, both are to be taken into account, is what I'm hoping to say as part of this bringing as landscape as this, rather than only on the ideological aspect. There is a material aspect, especially when you say that the states have been reconstituted, other things are being reconstituted. There is a bearing on terms of how and things are being moving in the ground. So then in that case, that may be a valuable one to bring into play. And the last point is about the place, the voting in the place that you also have. And I think elsewhere, it is not uncommon to assert that there is a relationship between class and the voting behavior. And I kind of think nationalism disturbs this equation that is being associated between class and the voting behavior. That, say for example, in the United States, all these wealthy people will vote for a particular party, and then there are all those other people who are not so wealthy would vote for another party. These kinds of, they're all kind of getting disturbed when the ideas of nationalisms are introduced into it. The point I want to draw your attention and would like to say is that place also matters. Where voter lives is crucial. National trends cannot be simply transferred to the local scale. I think in many ways you make this point to my mind when sectional effects, when you bring out differences in local and regional political cultures, they produce the spatial variations that we are in the support of either a given political party or otherwise. Those things come out. I do not think so much of environmental effects come into play. For instance, unemployment at that point of time, or for instance, incumbency of the candidates, if any, of that point of time, doesn't necessarily come out as part of that when we were talking about it then. But there may be others in terms of how the influences of voting can be identified. But you do stress out on the contextual effect, the social contact, friends, neighbors, others, or associations through this, the fan clubs that you pointed out. In general, that symbolic interaction, if you will, interpretation of the culture is noted. And I thought the place aspect comes in, but it could be enriched a little more to make that kind of a work that is very different from what I have seen before. Not much has been done. It opens up a pathway for us to reflect on, to do some more additional research on, and then opens up an avenue and a lot of possibilities for just not research, but also to get a handle on looking at this world perhaps in a different way than what we have done so far. For all of that, Madhava Prasad, wonderful, congratulations on this wonderful book, and Satish and the AFLU, I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to read that book and come and give my comments here. Thank you all.